afternoon, and welcome to the Golden Age podcast, where we focus on topics as they pertain to seniors 60 plus. I am your host, Renee Clark Graham. Today's topic is about grief and depression. My guest is Anitra Green. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Glad to have you. Tell us about yourself.
Hello, everyone. My name is Anitra J. Green, and I am a licensed clinical social worker. I've been in the field for over 25 years at this point. I am a proud Chester native, so it feels good to be back home.
Awesome.
I am the owner of Tailor Made Behavioral Health Solutions, which is a mental health counseling, consulting, and training company specializing in grief and loss. I opened my doors in March of 2021 in the pandemic. I couldn't think of a better time to serve, especially underserved communities and communities of
Very
color
timely.
who is underutilizing mental health resources. And I am an upcoming author of a children's book that is coming out
Good.
late summer, early fall. So there's a lot happening, but I'm happy to be here, particularly on the premises of National Minority Mental Health Awareness
Which
Month.
I knew nothing about until
Which starts in
today,
July.
which is very timely
So,
also, so I'm glad
very
that you're
timely.
here. Okay, let's jump into it. Can you please define what depression is for us, please?
Sure.
Thank you.
Depression is an emotion, of course.
Mm-hmm.
It's a mood which is characterized by persistent low mood,
Okay.
sadness, sometimes irritability and anxiety can be a part of that.
Okay.
And there are symptoms that I can discuss later,
Mm-hmm.
which allows a person to know that they may be depressed.
Okay. All right. So what are some of the main causes for depression?
So depression has a lot of different root
Mm-hmm.
causes. Sometimes it can be genetic. There are times that people have family histories of depression. Sometimes
Right.
people are not aware of that. Just like health problems can run in our family lineage, there's times where people have a family history. There are also, I think that there's many circumstances that can lead a person to be depressed,
Okay.
whether it's situational, up to and including things like grief and loss,
Mm-hmm.
relationship changes in our health, variety of things. So some of it can be circumstantial, but usually loss or some unexpected, disappointing factor
Okay.
has happened. But
Okay.
all of us have experienced feeling depressed at some point. I think it's a human emotion.
Yeah, a type of sadness.
Yes,
Or, yeah,
a
you're
form of
right.
sadness, but then there are people who have been diagnosed with depression because it's a persistent low mood that
Okay.
is really present over a long period of time.
So how do you know when you're depressed? Like, how do you know? I don't know if it's something it's not on the ordinary for you, or you just feel out of sorts, or how would you know that you're depressed? How do most people know that?
That's a great question. Well, there are times where a person may not originally know that they're dealing with depression.
Okay.
Sometimes it may just show up as tired. So depression affects us physically, emotionally, cognitively. So there are people who may not, I've talked to people that because I do this work as a therapist, and they describe certain things, and I might say, to me, it sounds like you could be depressed, and they're shocked.
Okay.
Right, because it's not always obvious. There are times where so some of the common symptoms of depression is, of course, the low mood, the sadness, the irritability, the lack of interest in particular things. So maybe you're a person who, always like to do things, and all of a sudden, you no longer have those interests.
So do you have to you kind of withdraw from activities
Yes.
and that kind of thing? Okay.
Isolation.
There you go.
A huge part of it, too, is this persistent feeling of helplessness and hopelessness. I think that those two things are a common feature in depression, where there's just no hope, a lot of hopelessness. A person may be tearful, but then we know that there's people who are depressed who are laughing and smiling. We've seen stories about people, you can't see depression all the time. And I
true.
think that this is what depression looks like. It's someone in the bed with the covers over their head, with the blinds pulled down. And I think that that's a misperception, because there are a lot of people who struggle with depression, and they're laughing and they're engaging and they're upbeat and they're dancing, and we see them out doing things. So it's very important for people to understand that it's not a one type of look to it.
I'm glad you said that, because when I think about depression, I think about not wanting to come out of the house and staying in, maybe staying in the bed, watching TV, just not doing anything but just being in that one environment. You know what I mean? Not wanting to deal with anybody, not wanting to speak to anybody or talk to or see anybody. When I think about depression, that's what I usually think of. And I'm glad you let us know that there's more to it than that.
Yes, and there's different levels. So not to get too clinical, but
That's
there's
okay, go ahead.
clinical depression, major depression. There's different degrees of depression that people struggle with. There are people who are depressed where they have to take medication and they cannot get out of the bed.
Wow.
There are people who struggle with depression and it's intermittent. There's seasonal depression. There's people who have depression during the winter months, and then when the spring and the summer comes, they do not battle that, which is referred to as seasonal affective disorder, which is a form of depression, but it's seasonal depression. So
Okay.
it's not the entire year.
Now, I've heard, like growing up, I guess my mom, maybe her friends, talking about the winter blues.
Yes.
Is that something that can be associated with depression as well?
Yes, seasonal affective disorder
Seasonal,
is a
okay.
real diagnosis, and there are people who struggle with depression during certain parts of the year. And believe it or not, I was surprised to read that there are people who struggle with depression in the summer. And I know that most of us think that, when the sun's out and it's summer, everyone's happy. But there are people who are not, for various reasons. The sunshine does not make them feel, the extra burst of energy
better.
or happy.
Wow.
So there are seasonal affective disorder is not just something that's committed to the winter. I think like 85% of it is in the winter, but there's
Okay.
like a small population who have it during other seasons.
Wow. Good to know. I didn't know that.
Yes.
Oh, in terms of numbers, I don't know if you treat a lot of seniors, but just in your estimate, in terms of numbers, are there a higher percentage in seniors? And if so, why?
I
What
can't really
contributes
speak
that?
to higher in seniors, and seniors are not. I do serve seniors in my practice, but primarily the seniors that are coming to me are for grief because that's what I specialize in.
All right.
However, I will tell you that depression is common in the aging population, and one of the big reasons is loneliness, isolation.
Let's talk about that. Yeah.
Yes, changes in health and grief, because there's a lot of things happening as
That's
people
true.
are aging.
Life
Their
is life,
health
and
is
that's true.
shifting. Finances, for some people shift. They're losing relationships due to various reasons, including death. And then when you think about people who are getting 80, 90 years old, where your siblings, a lot of your family member people are outliving
They've lost
their
a lot
children.
of their, lost a lot of their
because
family.
they live to be 100, but their child might have died at 80, which
Right.
your child lived a long life. But
Right.
it doesn't matter how old you are when you're losing
right.
people that you love. It's hard. So I do think that a lot of the aging, the grief that comes, the depression that comes in aging is loneliness, grief, and life changes.
Okay, now that was kind of my next question. It was like how depression affects elderly people in I guess in the opposite direction of the younger people that you serve. How does it affect them? You kind of touched on that a little bit about feeling lonesome and maybe being the last person left in their family. They don't have any family left, and it can just, I guess it just wears them down.
Yeah, and I think that in talking to the seniors that I have served in other capacities, even volunteering, when I was in graduate school, I volunteered in a nursing home.
Okay.
A lot of seniors feel that as they're aging, sometimes they feel forgotten about.
Right. Right.
They are no longer, for those of us who love to travel and who hop on trains and planes and automobiles to get to where we're going at. The life changes, things slowing down. And I'm not saying that because I know now people are living their best life and they are, society is shifting in.
Right. You're right.
90s is the new 80s and 80s is the new 60s. And,
Oh, yeah. It just keeps going
everybody
backwards,
we're
right?
living longer. And so there's a lot of advances and things that are happening, but there are, the aging process is still happening. And so there are still changes. Losing your driver's license, losing your ability to drive, losing that independence,
Yeah,
that makes people
they feel
very
like they're
sad.
stripped of everything.
Yes.
Like,
That their
Wow.
way of life is changing
It
slowly but
absolutely.
surely. And so I think that those things affect, and also, you know, there's certain things that people will say happens as you age. People talk about the appetite changes, eating less, sleeping a little more, sleeping a little less. I also think that there are some things that naturally happen that you age that also happen in depression. So, you know, a person who was already not eating a lot, like if
Okay.
your appetite has changed, it might be hard to
You just
say
don't
that you're
feel like it,
depressed.
yeah.
You might say, oh, well, I'm getting older, I just eat less, or I'm sleeping more. Body aches. There are physical components, forgetfulness, just feeling unmotivated. So I do think
Yeah.
that, and people don't always like to acknowledge depression. I think that there is still a stigma around it. People think that depression, you know, if I say that I'm feeling sad, you know, if I'm a person of faith, are people going to judge that?
Right.
What do I have to be sad about? I've had a great life. But again, a lot of life changes and a lot of losses are happening as we age naturally. And so grief is definitely, I think, probably one of the bigger parts. And when you have, you know, you think about someone who may be 80 years old, you know, they could have lost 5 friends
That's
in the
true.
last 2 years.
That's true.
Because people's, you know, things happen. And at this point, there are so many other changes that are happening. Like I
Right.
said, it's not just death, it's all the other changes, all the other losses. And the accumulation of that makes people feel sad.
How are we doing in terms of like, I know Black people in therapy, there's, like you said, there's a stigma there. How are we doing in terms of seeking services? Not for seniors, but just in general.
In
How are we
general.
doing with that?
So I can tell you when I started doing therapy 20 plus years ago, I was working with children. And one of the things that I noticed is that a lot of people would send their kids to counseling, but
Okay.
the adults would not
They
come.
wouldn't go. Wow.
No. Fast forward, when I opened my practice, I do accept children, and I would notice that a mom, let's say someone who, there's a lot that's happened in the family, overwhelmed.
Okay.
I'm seeing more adults now access service, which is a blessing,
That's
and
a
I'm
good
happy
thing,
to see
yeah.
that. Because I think post-pandemic, a lot of us realized that we weren't okay before the pandemic, and certainly
We definitely weren't okay
all the
during
things
the
that
pandemic,
happened
that's for
during and
sure.
after. And then there's a lot more conversations about mental health. People are talking about having a therapist. People are talking about it's okay to not be okay. There's really been a big push on stopping the suffering and silence. We've seen some suicides that have rocked, you know, our
Yeah.
culture, and people are like, oh,
It's
what
true,
happened
really.
with this
With
person?
that person.
The stories, our men, our women. And so I think that for a lot of people, it was a wake-up call to just say, hey, we don't have to suffer in silence. There is help. There is hope. Therapy is not a dirty word. Needing counseling doesn't mean that you're weak or that you don't have faith or anything else that we've made
Right.
therapy seem. And there's a lot of Black therapists on the front lines.
But they're hard to find. Unless you know, but I'm
they
looking and I'm like, I don't see
They
anybody.
are.
Ooh,
So
they're
in
hard to
terms of
find.
numbers,
Yeah.
we still make up about 4%, but we're out here.
Yeah.
It might take you 2 or 3 months
You
to get
have-
an
you have-
appointment.
yeah, you have
but
to
we're out
dig
here.
deep to
and
find
so
them.
there's all types of directories, which I would be glad to drop in the chat.
That would be awesome. Yeah.
There's places and spaces now that you can go that just have therapists of color on their platform, so that you don't have to
That
scroll
would be
through
a real help,
500
'cause it's
people to
hard
find two.
us. Yeah, it's hard.
So
We're out there, but
I will drop that information. It's definitely a little easier to find us than
That's
it used to
good.
be after the pandemic.
so we should be encouraged by the number of people who are seeking help and want services.
Yes,
I would hope so.
Yes, and we hope that there's an influx of people who want to come into the field, because we
Okay.
definitely need more of us in the field.
All right, you graduates, you hear that? There's a need.
Yes, listen up.
Let me ask you this: what steps, if any, can be taken to prevent or lessen depression, or the chances of becoming depressed? Is that something you can control or not?
If it's genetic, being
You really
aware of
can't.
your family history, there's
Okay.
things that you can do to manage it. And,
All right.
from a spiritual place, there is, depression is complex. What I will say is this: people are living every day healthy, productive lives who may struggle with depression on an
Right.
ongoing basis, or who have situational depression. It just depends on the source of your depression. But being aware, number one, I think is knowledge is power. You need to know what depression
Always.
is, what it looks like. Listening to this podcast, learning what the signs are. People may not recognize that they had depression prior to even though it's a common conversation. There's a lot of people who are just still ignorant. Then there's people who may suspect it, but they're afraid of what it means.
Okay.
Especially in our culture. Am I going to get a
Right.
diagnosis? Are they going to put me on medication? Am I going to lose my, job, being judged? People feel embarrassed, ashamed, and all of that, which you should not.
Okay.
Mental health is mental health.
Okay,
What
so
go
ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
The other part of that is, I think, being aware, and then once you realize that you need help, it's really about being honest.
Exactly, with yourself.
You need to be able to
first, yeah.
say, we have this mindset about being strong, and again, depression has nothing to do with weakness. In the same way that if you have diabetes or any other health problems,
There you go.
it's not about your own personal structure. And I think that that's something that we have to work on, is the judgment and people feeling that it means that they're weak or anything
And I think
to
we
be
do take those
embarrassed
things
about.
personal.
Yes.
You said you wouldn't take a diabetes diagnosis that personal or high blood pressure, but it's something about the mental health piece that people find they're embarrassed about it. They don't want to talk about it. They don't want to get serviced. And I guess we need to overcome that.
Yeah, we
and
need to
do better.
access the supports and be honest and transparent. I mean,
Okay.
therapy is, again, something that I recommend for people who struggle with depression. And you know yourself better than anybody else.
Right.
I mean, we're the expert on our own lives. You know if you are sad most times or that you have this persistent feeling of hopelessness and helplessness. The thing about mental health is that no one can read your mind.
That's true.
Right. So if we're not honest about what we're feeling internally, if we can't have these conversations, then a lot of people suffer in silence, and it just
Okay.
perpetuates. And the end result of depression untreated, for those who have, serious levels of depression,
Right.
it has resulted in suicide for some people.
Wow.
So, we don't want to see people end up in
And that's
crisis.
when we find out about it. Like
And
on
if
the
you need
news, like,
medication
what?
to be
Yeah.
treated, there's a lot of stigma around medication. There are people who have depression and they need to be medicated because that is how they manage their depression, and that is okay. I think
And that's
there's
my next question. How can depression be treated? What other than medication? Is there another way to treat depression?
therapy.
Okay.
Yes, going to a licensed mental health professional, whether that's a psychiatrist, a psychologist, a mental health professional, a licensed clinical social worker, all of the different titles, because depression is treatable, just like
Right.
other illnesses and other health problems are treatable. If you are struggling with depression on an ongoing basis, right, and it is not resolving itself,
Right.
there's depression from breakups, right?
Right.
You break up in a relationship, you go through a period of sadness, and then it dissolves,
it's a
and
loss.
you move yourself
Yeah, it's a
forward.
loss.
But there are people who have this ongoing, long-term, persistent struggle with depression. If that is you, and even those who are suffering from other losses, it's really about having opportunities to express yourself,
Okay.
learn coping skills, learning strategies, doing natural things like taking walks, exercising. There are all kinds of things and strategies that you can do to manage depression, but you have to acknowledge that you struggle with it. And I think
Right.
that that's where the challenge is, just people want to zip their lips and pretend that they're okay.
Because I think most times when people think about being treated for depression, they think about medication. They think that you have to be medicated,
And you don't.
All this other. What is
that is an option, but that is not the only way that depression is treated.
I can't think of the word went right out of my head. It's a type. Psychotherapy. What is that? Is that
Therapy.
That's
Therapy,
something
that's
that
the same thing.
they can
Psychotherapy
use
is therapy.
for- okay.
Talk therapy.
Okay.
Yes.
All
Talking
right.
to a counselor.
Okay. We touched a little bit about the effects of depression on your appetite, your weight, and your sleep patterns. Can you go over that just a little bit more specifically? Like, what are some of the side effects of depression on your physical being, your appetite, your weight, and your sleep patterns? How does that get affected?
Yeah, so from being in that constant state of just having a low mood, people will describe depression as feeling exhausting, like your battery is uncharged. You
Right.
think about a cell phone that's just always on low. You plug it in, you don't charge up. Depression is draining. And so with that low mood and that low energy, for some people, it causes them to undereat. For some people, it causes them to overeat. So
Okay.
depression can lead to weight loss or weight gain. That's important to know. because a lot of people put on weight in depression because they're emotional eating.
Right.
They're
And
eating
not
unhealthy
active
foods.
or
They're not
whatever,
active.
yeah.
You don't feel like getting up. So you're either under eating, overeating, a lack of activity, and just really little motivation. So all of that, it can affect your health. It affects your work. Life.
sure.
People have lost jobs because of depression. It affects your relationships because when you go into what I call an island experience and you're not connecting to anyone,
Right.
People don't know how to reach you. And then you lose, there's people who have lost relationships because they just, the isolation, you cut people off.
It sounds like the pandemic again, because
It does.
everybody was isolated from everybody else, and it was just a mess.
So depression can affect every area of your life, your body, your relationships, your career.
Right.
And it's why it's important to treat it.
But the key is not to try to get overwhelmed with it. But if you do,
Yes.
then there's help to be had.
Yes.
Okay.
Talking, and just pushing yourself behind. People will tell you that they have to sometimes try to push themselves. No, I don't feel like taking that 15-minute walk, but I know that I've
need
had
to
clients
do
who
it,
struggle
yeah.
with depression, and it's like, just take a 10-minute walk. And they take a 10-minute walk, and it's like, well, what does a walk going to do? Just take a 10-minute walk, because there's
Change your scenery
natural
or
endorphins
something,
in our
yeah.
bodies that are released when we move. We were created to move. God
Okay.
made our bodies to move.
Right.
When we're moving, we're releasing chemicals and natural feel-good, chemicals that are in our
Right.
bodies, endorphins. And when you're not moving, those things are not being activated. So
Okay.
just doing something as simple as just take a 5-minute walk, and people are like, oh, I took a 5-minute walk, now I'm up to 10. I have clients who are taking 30-minute walks, and it's a part of their
And before you know it,
coping
they're-
skills
yeah.
is that they are now exercise. And it's a woman who talks about how Zumba saved her life. I mean, she didn't want to
Really?
do anything else, but she loves to dance, and it just started with, I'm just going to get out the bed and do Zumba.
Okay.
And that turned into her now being a fitness person.
Really?
And really operating at a high place in life now. And she talks about how Zumba changed her life. So you may think that getting up and dancing or taking a 10-minute walk, a brisk walk, but it's about little steps. It's
Right.
not about the big things. It's about, what can I do today?
Baby steps.
Can I call one person this week? Can I get out the bed? For those who are at that level of depression, and there's people, like I said, that go to work every day and they're out the bed every day. It doesn't mean they're not depressed, but they're high. I call it high functioning depression.
Okay.
And those are
Wow, that's interesting. Can you speak to like depression and physical pain? Is there a link between the two?
It is a link there is a connection, about a connection between depression and physical pain. And a lot of times, honestly, I think that is one of the manifestations that people underlook,
Okay.
overlook, shall I say. And it is the physical pain. So there's people who talk about all of these aches and pains in their bodies. And our bodies carry that. Physical pain is like a manifestation of emotional pain. And it is a correlation. Now, is everybody who's in physical pain depressed? No. For people who struggle with depression, are they in pain? People will tell you that sometimes they can feel it.
Is it like
They're achy.
okay, the muscle aches or
Muscle aches,
whatever? Yeah.
tension, stress.
Okay.
People also who struggle with depression sometimes struggle with anxiety as well, because I call them cousins,
Right.
where there's a lot. They're concerned about certain things and how is this going to happen? And, and it's one of those things where depression does not have, it affects all races, all socioeconomic
Oh, yeah, there's no
statuses,
respected
all
person.
ages.
None
I
at
know we're
all.
talking about
Yeah.
seniors today, but disappointments, just dealing with life disappointments. And so there are times where people will say, they're achy. A person who told me about how much physical pain, their body hurts. But because I noticed other things, I told that person, I think that you're struggling with depression.
Wow.
And your physical pain is a part of it, and they didn't think that.
Okay.
They didn't think that physical pain had anything to do. And it's like, I'm going to the doctors and everything is okay. And it's like, yeah, it's emotional pain.
Okay. But I know a person, a guy, who was, I guess he had suffered a few losses and things weren't just going his way. And he started getting these headaches. Is that could be part of his physical pain for
grief.
depression?
So just to jump back to grief,
Right.
because I know that I mentioned a lot of the depression that people experience in older stages. Grief is a huge part of that because
For
there's
sure.
all of these changes. But people are surprised when I'm talking to people about grief. They're often surprised on the ways that it affects their bodies.
It's all one thing. It works together.
And it's not just because it's grief, it's the stress of the grief. Grief is a very long-term stressful experience.
Right.
It's emotionally draining. You're wanting to connect with a person, especially when it's a physical death, and trying to wake up every day and learn how to live without a person. Your life has changed.
For sure.
The world is going on. Your bills are still coming in. Everything is
true.
still normal, but your life is not the same.
It's not the same, and it never will be again.
So, there's the business of grief, and there's death certificates, and there's planning a funeral, and there's all this work that you have to do, and then you have to cognitively deal with it. So, forgetfulness, chest pains. There are people whose grief exacerbates your physical health. So if a person's health is already bad, grief can destroy it.
Wow.
If you don't learn how to manage your emotions, understand how to take care of yourself, practice some self-care, grief can really do a number on you. And I don't think that I think people underestimate it. I mean, I always talk about the Uvalde story where those children were killed. When that husband went to his wife was a teacher. She died. He went to her gravesite, and then he went home and had a massive heart attack. That's like 30 minutes later.
Oh, God.
So, grief has taken people out of here. The stress of grief, not just because they're feeling sad, it's what it's doing to their bodies. So in the same way that grief shows up in your body, depression also is affecting.
It can just take over your life.
Our thought processes is affecting our health. We're losing sleep. We're tired.
Right.
We don't forget things. If you're not getting proper rest, that affects your ability to recall things, to remember things. You're tired. So there's our mind and our body are all interrelated.
For sure. Now, how long can depression last? I mean, have you seen depression? I know that it can go on for months, maybe or so, and then maybe they'll level off, but realistically, how long can depression last?
It can last in somebody's entire lifetime. It depends
Wow.
on the source of the depression,
right?
And if a person has, because it's various levels of depression. So a person could go through a period of severe depression because they have multiple situations happening, and then they're okay. Because the circumstances pass. And then there's people who have a diagnosis of depression and they struggle with it their entire life.
Okay.
It just depends.
Now, one of the shows I used to like to watch, I guess it was on TLC, was Hoarders. Hoarders, is that a direct reaction to depression? That has nothing to do with depression? Nothing at all?
I think hoarding comes from, and I don't have any background in working with people who do hoarding.
That's something different.
Yeah, but sometimes it's about, not being able to let things go. Emotional distress is definitely connected to emotional things. Hoarding is something that's rooted in some type of emotions, whether it's anxiety, grief, wanting to hold on to things, OCD. It's probably a variety of things, but it's definitely an emotional manifestation of something, but depression, it just being depression.
Because I'm an untrained eye to that. So I looked like, man, these people must really be depressed or something because they're just not caring. And to me, when I used to watch it, and I'm like, okay, how can people, live like that? And I'm thinking they must have really had some major losses, or they're really depressed.
Yeah,
or
trauma,
depressed over
growing up, abuse
years.
in their history, growing up like that. Emotional connections, but I don't have. There are interventions for people who struggle with hoarding, and there's help for people. Emotional help.
It's a separate emotion, I guess. We're separate.
I think it's a variety of things that lead people to hoard.
Right.
I don't think it comes from one specific space, but it's definitely an emotional tie to hoarding.
Okay, how can you spot potential depression in people? I won't even say senior citizens. I'll just say in people generally. You as the licensed therapist, how do you spot potential depression? Or if you're talking to someone and maybe you get a sense of what their life has been like and things they've gone through, and you think you might see something that might lead you to believe, how do you spot that? Like, are there things that you listen for when you talk to them, or things that you look for? If you're in their physical presence in their home or something, how do you spot?
So are you talking
depression?
about when clients come to me personally, or are you speaking of me just in general with family and friends.
Well, I guess both.
Having
If you can break it down for me, both. Yeah. How do you spot it? Like, what triggers in your mind? Like, you know what? I think there may be something going on.
Yeah, the thing
here,
about depression is that sometimes you can spot it and sometimes you can't.
Okay.
Because going back to the person who might be a comedian, you know, it could be someone in your life that's very funny and, you know, doesn't show any signs of depression. Because people know how to put on a face. You know, every smiling face isn't happy, and every, you know, person that has a frown on their face, it doesn't mean that they're unhappy. Depression is something that can be hidden, you know, so I can't necessarily spot it. I mean, you know, we know the comedian Robin Givens. He took his life. He was a comedian. I think that there's people who you look at them and you go, oh, you know, they're so happy and upbeat and bubbly, and they could be very depressed.
Are you talking about Robin Harris?
Yes. No, Robin. I'm trying to think. Robin Williams. Is that
Robin Williams. Yeah,
yes, the comedian.
Yeah.
So in terms of spotting it, there's not a look to depression. I would not say that I could spot it. If you have a relationship with people and you can notice changes, like if and as a parent. I'm going to use this as an example. If your kid is a straight A student and they have a healthy appetite and they like to run around and go out all the time, and now you're noticing they're not eating, their grades are dropping, they don't want to hang out anymore. So I think that there are things that you can spot. Those are signs that I will be able to look and say, okay, I'm noticing these changes. Then there's things that you can't spot because people. If you don't have an up close and personal relationship, people can laugh all day and be a joker and, you know, laugh and kid and all of that, and then go home and be, you know,
oh my God,
drinking and
hard.
And controlling their, you know, going home in the privacy of their homes and then allowing their true selves to be revealed, which is why I always say that that's got to be hard.
Because you're doing like you're living two separate lives. You know what I mean? I just.
And
like
it depends on how much you want to show, you know, how vulnerable that you want to be. And sometimes you can't hide it because it's just obvious. And some people are just like open with their depression. They're like, hey, I struggle with depression. So, you know, we just went to see the movie Inside Out, and one of the characters on there is Sadness, and you know, she cries a lot, and so there's times where you might sense that someone is depressed because their mood is always low, but then there's times that you just don't know. And I think that that's why I said that when a person is struggling, only you know your real truth.
Exactly.
Nobody can, you know that for you, and we have to become more honest and open. If someone is talking to you about suicide, however, there are some clear red flags that someone is feeling hopeless and helpless. And there are times where a person might tell you, sometimes I don't want to be here. You know, when you're getting into that level, you need to dial 911, let that person know that you need to get help. You know, this is not a recommendation. This is a crisis. You know, and we don't want to see people in that state. There's a national number 988 that someone can dial if you're watching this and you're at the state 988? Yes, if you're, you know, watching this and you are in, you know, a person is in a crisis state. It's a suicide prevention hotline. Okay. We always need to know the end result of extreme depression can be a person deciding that they want to take their lives, and people need to know what to do.
Right.
And it's better for them to be angry at you, than for them to be gone. So if anybody calls you, that's not the conversation, and say, oh, well, you talking like that, things will get better. That wouldn't be a good thing. Right. It's really like, hey, you need to go to your local hospital. You're having a mental health crisis. In the same way, if someone told you they were having crushing chest pains, you would get them to the ER. It has to be taken that serious when someone is talking about wanting to take their life. And we have to be comfortable having those conversations.
Right, because that's hard.
I'm comfortable because I do it every day as a therapist. But for the everyday person,
it can be a lot.
Tamika is asking, I'm sorry. I see that she's saying, I'd like that explained more, if possible, high functioning depression. That just means, I'm thinking about the model Chesley Chris. I watched the video, and if you've never heard of Chesley Chris, watch her story. But she was a person that considered to be a high functional depression. She was an attorney, very high functioning, Miss America, all types of titles. Very high.
She was like 30 years old.
30 years old. Absolutely beautiful. A life that people would dream of.
Would envy, for real.
So she was not at home, unable to get from out of the covers over the bed, but she struggled her mom talks about she's had her struggles and while seeking support.
And she wrote
the
a book,
depression
correct?
I think she wrote a book about it.
Right.
The mother did, I want to read the book. But it just means that people can function, in their day-to-day life. CEOs, corporate levels,
Wow.
very high functioning. It doesn't always mean that you have low energy and that, it doesn't look a certain way.
Exactly.
So that's why I said high functional. People are high functional with depression. It's not anything called high functional depression, but people can function at very high levels and still struggle with depression. And people think that, you're at home, you're unemployed, you can't get a job,
looks like,
you
but
can't
that's not
get out
true.
the bed,
Right.
you can't do this, you can't do that. No, people are doing some very amazing things in life.
Wow.
And have very high positions, and they don't look, again, we're talking about this look, they don't look like
Exactly.
it.
I
So that's
watched
what
a
I meant by high
video
functioning.
of DJ Twitch the other night. I'm
He's
thinking,
another one, DJ
what in
Twitch.
the world could have been? What was on his mind?
And people are like, oh, he couldn't have been depressed. They were like, he couldn't have been depressed. We think it was foul play.
No,
Well,
but
people
then
don't
again,
have to look. There's not a depression look. You can
you're right.
dance and party and do all of that and still very much have these internal battles that's happening. And it's for some people who struggle with it, they'll tell you it's like being in warfare every day. The
That
struggle
must be
between
the hardest
wanting
thing
to,
ever.
yes,
Really?
but the thing that I keep reminding people is that depression is treatable, that you don't have to struggle. I mean, I can't say that enough. It is not something there's no treatment for, right? There's some things that there's not really much that people will say outside of an intervention or a miracle. There's no treatment. There's some things that are no treatment for. Depression is something that is treatable. Is the end result? Does everybody have the same outcome? Not necessarily.
No.
But do people have depression, have a diagnosis of depression, and live productive lives where they are able to have joy, pleasure,
Again, right.
and enjoyable life? Absolutely. And so there is help and there is hope. But we have to know where the resources are, and we have to be honest about where we're really at.
Yeah, that's true. You have to kind of
And
own
it's
your
strong,
stuff.
right?
Yeah,
Because
you have
people,
to own
especially in
your
our
stuff.
culture, I'm strong. I don't need any help. This is just a
Wrong.
part
So
of the culture,
false. That's
and
so not
all
true.
of these narratives that says, and it's okay to say, I'm really not in a good place.
I'm struggling. Yes, I'm
right.
struggling.
I got a lot going on.
Right.
Financially, there's a lot going on. I got all of this grief. I'm disappointed about how I thought life would be right now and where it is. But and that's the power of talking. We have to have people that we can trust, and for some people they're never going to walk into a therapy office. But perhaps it's having a trusted person that you can really be honest with.
Right.
Journaling. I think everybody who struggles should get counseling, but we know that you're never going to have 100%
Right.
of people doing what's best for them.
Okay.
But you need to do something, because doing nothing does not help.
Okay, does joining a conversation, like I told you before we started, about a month ago, I lost the closest friend I've ever had since I was like 5 years old. And she just passed away less than 30 days ago. And like I was given this, I guess it was a doctor, I can't remember, it was a Zoom.
Okay.
A Zoom. Is that, I guess just to be in the presence of other people who are feeling the same way as you are, could that be helpful, or does that kind of like make you go the opposite direction? Like,
No,
man, these people are bringing me. I don't know how to feel, and being a part of that community, is that helpful?
I think it can be helpful, being connected. I think when you're struggling with depression in general, that being connected is important just for the journey.
Right.
Isolation is not good, and although that's what people prefer, that loss of connection with people just leads to further feelings of alienation, and then you're feeling more depressed.
Right.
So being connected is a good thing. I believe that staying connected to people, staying connected to community is important.
Okay.
And going to a group and hearing about other people who share your struggle, it can be very comforting to know that you're not by yourself, especially if you are not sure, like a lot of people struggle with depression. It's a very
Right.
common mental health challenge that people struggle with. And so when you realize that it's not just you, I do think that it opens people
It
up
does
to
help a little
understand
bit,
that
yeah.
I'm not in this thing alone.
Right. Because I haven't done it yet, but I'm actually thinking about doing it.
And
because
there's grief
on
groups.
Zoom you can be anonymous.
Yes.
You don't have to post your picture. You can just listen. And sometimes that might help.
And are you talking about, when you were talking about groups, are you just talking about in general? Any kind of group? Are you
In
talking
general.
about grief groups?
Like a grief
Depression
group.
group, okay.
Grief, depression/depression, I guess it would be. I guess maybe that was mainly for grief, I think.
Yeah, and I mean, groups are great for grief. Some people don't want that. Some people like to talk one-on-one.
Right.
I think that there's people who start out one-on-one and then eventually they want to join a group.
Okay.
It just depends on your personality, where you're at in your grief, but it can all be helpful.
Okay. How do you see a good way to promote good mental health in general? Seniors included, but how would you tell someone, or how could you personally as a licensed therapist promote good mental health? What are some of the things that you would recommend?
First, I would say to be self-aware. I think it really starts with understanding and assessing yourself. A lot of times we're spending time, you know, when we're raising children, we're checking other people out, we're checking on this person, we're assessing other people. It's easy to look around you. But I think that introspective look inside of yourself to say, how am I doing? You know, doing a self-check-in. How am I doing?
Okay.
How is my mood been? Am I stressed? Am I overwhelmed? Do I need a break? Am I overcommitted to things? Am I sad? Am I happy? A lot of people are not self-aware.
Okay.
When you become self-aware, that is when, if you know that you're not feeling yourself, we all know what our normal state of being is.
Right.
I know my baseline for how I am usually, right? There's people who have mood swings and mood changes, but most of us know what our normal mood is.
Right.
When we notice that that's changing, that we're snappy, that we're crying more, that we're more irritable, right? Those are signs that our emotions need to be, that we need to do some self-care.
Okay.
And we need to manage our emotions.
So it's a kind of a warning, like a signal.
Yes, looking for signals. You know, the light comes on in the car, the orange light lights up. It lets us know something is going on. We have to pay attention to the signals. Sometimes it's sleep disturbances. Sometimes it is notices in our mood. Sometimes people are telling us, you haven't been yourself lately. You know, you're a little irritable. You don't really want to talk anymore. Sometimes other people notice it. We think that it's not noticeable, but it is.
But it is. Okay.
And then responding to it, whether that is going to a counselor. There's a lot of people who are listening to this podcast and they know they need to go to therapy.
Okay.
They know that their emotions have been out of check for a long time, but then we say we don't have the time, we don't have the money, we don't have this.
Sometimes you have to
we
make
have to
the time.
prioritize our mental health in the same way that we prioritize our health, because mental health is health. And if you don't take care of your mental health, your physical health will pay the price.
You'll suffer, right?
Because it's all connected. And practicing self-care, knowing how to take a break. I just think that living in this grind culture where, you know, sleep is for the weak and, you know, with sleep and not taking a break and vacation. God did not make our bodies to just go.
I have to change my scenery every few months or so.
Yeah, we need to rest.
Yeah,
sleep is not an option. You need to get 6 to 8 hours of sleep. I understand that there's seasons where you can't do that, perhaps because you're building or you're working, but sleep is not, a lack of sleep is not good for your health, your physical health, or your mental health.
Right.
And just understanding that it's okay to take care of yourself. I just think, especially as people of color, you know, people taking a break was not really a part of anything that we were ever told to do.
It's true.
The work ethics, we weren't treated at some point even like humans.
We had to keep
the
it
way
moving.
that you run a robot in a factory and a machine, but we're not machines. Our hearts, our organs, everything needs to shut down and rest at some point.
That's true.
And recharge. And if we keep going at that pace, you know, I believe that we're shortening our lives because we're not getting enough rest. And so, you know, it has to be balance in life. And if you're a person who struggles with just, you know, taking a nap. If you're tired, take a nap. Your body will tell you when it's tired. I can't take a nap because I got 3 loads of clothes to do when I got this and that. Guess what?
The clothes can wait. Exactly.
Right? Because if your body is giving you warning signs and then we're drained and then we're irritable and then we're stressed and Stress is a silent killer. So when you're constantly operating at high levels of stress, you are overworking your mind and your body. So we have to learn how to chill.
Can you say that about stress again? Can you put that out there again?
Stress is a silent killer. And if we don't learn how to rest and relax, we are shortening our lifespans because we need to be able to, we have to learn how to chill. Some people don't know how to relax.
Right.
We need to have a day where we're doing nothing. Mm-hmm. And if we're not there yet, we should be working towards a day that we're doing nothing. Yeah. So all of that, I know that's a long answer, but
no, but it's fine. It needs to be said.
It's a comprehensive answer to what do we need to do. We need to be okay with doing nothing.
Okay. And I think because we come from a history where we were just driven to keep going and keep going and keep going. It's like, it's just too much. And I think that
and it feels unproductive. It feels like when I'm resting I should be doing something, but you're doing your body a favor.
Right.
Because if you want longevity, this is going back to the seniors, even retirement, at some point we need to stop working. And I know people don't like to do it.
You're preaching to the choir.
And working has its place, right? And even if you go from full-time to part-time, I understand productivity.
Right.
Right? But you start working at 12, 13, 14, after a certain amount of years.
You're just tired.
And some people are working because they want to, and some people can't afford to stop working, which is another conversation.
You're right about that.
But we need to find a way to increase our rest so that we're giving our bodies some and fun. Rest and fun.
Keep up. Yeah.
Rest and fun. Because we say work hard, play hard, but in between the working hard and playing hard, we got to have a period of rest.
Single moms, okay? After my husband died, I became a single parent. And single moms are just driven because we think we have to do everything all the time. Do you see your fair share of single moms in your practice who just feel driven to just put that superwoman costume on and just do it all?
I do. I've had several single moms, and I sometimes I share with them that prior to being married, I'm married now for 7 years, but I was a single mother for 7 years before I was married, and I know about that life. I worked a full-time job at school and every other weekend because, we're motivated to make sure that our children have. But one thing that I tell people is you need a village. Mm-hmm. You need a village. Adult needs villages too, not just children. Yeah. But where are the godparents, the aunties, the uncles, the grandparents, your friends? Use your resources.
Step in every now and again.
Ask for people. Ask for help. If we don't ask for it, you might not get it. But yes, because it's stressful when you're having to do the part and you're trying to make up and compensate, and not to try to overcompensate. It's just some realities is that we have to let other people step in, and we can do our best, but it can be exhausting.
And we need to accept the help. I think that's the key.
Yes.
To accept the help. If it comes. Except yes.
Yeah. Yes. And don't be too proud to ask.
No, for sure.
We never got to beg anybody for anything, but it's okay to say if somebody's saying, how you doing? Is everything good? It's times that I had to be honest and be like, listen, I get paid on Friday and my baby need medicine today.
Exactly.
And it's times where I had to be, her godmom was like, she need anything? And I'm like, well, I'm going to need you to handle this prescription.
I got paid today and I don't have any money tonight.
I wasn't expecting these eye drops to cost $65.
Exactly.
And, it gets real. And I don't, I share that with them that this is not, if you don't ask, you won't help. Instead of saying, oh, everything is good. No, I'm okay. Because we think, well, I shouldn't have to ask anybody for anything. This is my child. That's not true, especially when you're doing the work of two parents.
That's true.
It's not.
You got a dual role.
We can only do our part, right?
That's true.
Trying to do other people. So, let the
right.
people who want to help. That's what I'm going to say.
Okay, my last question. Well, not the last question, because at the end of this, I want you to go back and talk about the signs of depression. That's very important to me. People need to hear that. But this last question is like, in what way can we lend emotional support for people who may be going through depression? Seniors or not, just in general. Okay. As a friend or as an outsider or as a teacher, or how can we lend emotional support to somebody who might need that?
Physical presence is very important.
Okay.
Communication, conversation, if you can physically spend time. And I think just being honest and having a conversation. I mean, I had a conversation with someone, and it's hard because I am a therapist, I never want people to think that I'm walking around, assessing everybody.
Right.
Because people think you do that. Like,
I'm sure,
you
like,
know,
she's judging me,
assessing, you know, diagnosing, saying, oh,
or she's making
lack
mental
of energy,
notes.
lack of this,
Exactly,
making
right.
mental notes. No. But when you know information, you know it, right?
Right.
If you're a person who specializes, if you're a doctor and you hear somebody saying, I keep having shortness of breath and this is happening, and I notice that, you know, anytime I dust, I'm doing this. And if a doctor hears that, they might say, it sounds like you might have asthma, right? That's what you,
Right.
when you're knowledgeable in a subject and you know it, then you know when you hear it or see it.
Exactly.
Right, so it's not a walking around assessing it, but when the information is in our faces,
Right.
we should say, if we know that a person may be struggling with depression, and we see that they're, you know, not getting out of the bed, they're losing interest, they're having conversations with us about how hopeless and helpless they feel. It's okay to say, you know what, you're sounding kind of sad. You might be
Right.
struggling with depression. Did you
Might
ever think
wanna
about that? Did you ever think
check
about
that
talking to
out.
your doctor?
Right,
Did you ever think
exactly.
about you know, talking to a counselor? I heard this podcast. Read this book. Listen to this podcast. Somebody was talking about this the other day. I think we have to be comfortable being
That's
honest
true.
and sharing information and resources
That's
with people.
true.
And sometimes we know that people are struggling. Sometimes we don't know. Not being judgmental, not saying things to them like, "Oh, well, you're a Christian. Why are you
Yeah,
depressed?"
there's a way to say things to people and a way to address people.
Or the devil is a liar.
Yeah,
You ain't
exactly.
depressed. Yes, I am.
Yeah,
He is
I
a
am.
liar, but I am
and
depressed
Christians
right
do
now.
get depressed. Don't get that twisted.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So yeah.
Muslims and any other
Everybody.
faith,
That's
because
you're
we're human.
Here you go.
We have these raw emotions, and so we have to be careful not to, you know, put people in a box and make them feel like because
Okay.
they're being honest, you know, now there's something wrong with their faith, or now there's something they're not strong enough, or you know who your mother was. You know, you come from a
Exactly.
lineage of strong women. We don't
And
do
that's
that around
very
here.
true. And they
You
had
know,
their time to be, you know, feeling.
and
with
many of
dealing
them
with
were
stuff, too.
struggling
So,
as well,
yeah.
but they didn't talk about it, right?
No,
So you
no.
know, and it's not about strength. It's really about emotional well-being and needing support.
Yeah.
And it's making us human.
Okay.
The village
Terrence
is such a
said, yeah,
blessing.
such
Oh,
a
that's
blessing.
my husband. Hello,
Is that-
husband. It is. He supports everything
It's
that
true.
I do. I love my
That's
husband.
a good. He got a good one. That's awesome.
Yes, the
That's
village is
awesome.
such a blessing from God. It really is. It really is. And just going back to that, adults need villages.
That support
You know,
should-
when you're
that's
getting
the
older, you
truth.
need your friends, you need your family. If you have aging family members, you know, a lot of times we do get busy and we forget to check on them, or
Right.
we feel like, oh, well, they're doing good. They're independent. They can cook, they can drive, they can do this, but they still are lacking the socialization, or not in work
They're
environments
vulnerable,
anymore.
exactly,
They're vulnerable.
for
They're
sure.
losing people. They're losing siblings. Many of them are the last sibling out of 10 siblings. You know, you're the only one.
That's
That's
true.
hard.
That is
you
hard.
buried 9 of your all of your siblings. Now
And
you're
you're the
an
only one left.
You're the
Like,
only
oh my
one left.
God.
Those are really real life examples that are
Right.
happening in real time as people are aging. Losing their memory, losing your driver's
Yeah.
license, losing. So there's a lot of loss that happens.
That can cause depression.
And we're
to
not
set
thinking
in.
about that when we're driving around in our cars. But
It's
then,
true.
you know, I worked in a hospital and someone said, you know, my dad is in there crying. We're trying to get these keys from him. And I said, you're not just taking his keys. You're taking his independence.
life. You absolutely
You know,
are.
and so
that's a whole other thing
if the
to
keys
deal with.
represent
Yeah.
independence, then it's different. It's not just, oh, he can't drive, he can get an Uber, we can take him. No, it's called, I'm losing my own ability
Exactly.
to get
To do-
myself
take-
from
and take
A to
care of
Z.
myself and do
and
what
if
I
you
need
can
to
imagine
do.
that doesn't sound like an easy thing to do. It's
No,
not.
not at all.
And I'm not at that phase, but just thinking
at
about
all.
what my car freedom means to me, those things are what is happening in real time.
It's true. Okay, so we're going to wind it up, but what I wanted to talk about, I wanted you to reiterate the symptoms or the signs of depression, so whoever's listening out there can know, well, maybe I either know somebody who's doing this, or maybe it's me, or so they can be clear and kind of have a sense of starting to pay attention to what might be happening.
Okay.
So if you could close us out with what the symptoms are and what to look for.
Yes.
That
Because
would
there
be
are
so
some
helpful.
clear
Yeah,
indicators.
clear signs.
And even for people who end up with a diagnosis of depression, The DSM will tell you the diagnostic manual that therapists use when they're giving someone a depression diagnosis. And I want to say again that this is not about self-diagnosing. There are people who have depression because it's situational, and then there are people who struggle with this over a long period of time.
Right.
However, if you notice that you are struggling with these symptoms on a persistent, ongoing matter, I do suggest that you talk to your primary care physician about it, because
Right.
it could be affecting your health, and that you consider seeking the support and help of a licensed mental health professional, because that is what we do.
Okay.
We treat depression.
Right.
We work with people who are depressed. And then psychiatrists, for those who need medication interventions, there is a psychiatrist, and the medical doctors handle that side for those who need it. Not everybody needs to be on medication.
Okay.
But therapy and medication are the two primary treatments for depression.
And
For people who struggle with depression, and particularly those who have been diagnosed with it, because it's been a long-term, ongoing challenge.
okay, so you're seeing your behaviors change. You don't want to be social anymore.
Yeah, so I'm going to get into the list
there
now.
we go.
It is obviously one of the bigger things is the persistent feeling of a low mood.
Low mood, okay.
Sadness.
Right.
Persistent feelings of hopelessness and helplessness. So feeling stuck, feeling like the future is being unable to think futuristically or seeing the future because you feel stuck in a rut.
Right, or you don't see yourself included in that
Yes,
future.
you don't see yourself feeling trapped. A lot of times it does affect people's motivation, having a low mood, having a lack of interest or low interest in things that you once found pleasurable. So
Okay.
whether that's shopping or cooking or whatever. Isolation, increased feelings of wanting to be alienated or isolated from other people. It also does affect your sleep and your eating. Those are two major parts of your, day-to-day activities of daily living that struggle, whether it's having a hard time falling asleep or having a hard time staying asleep or oversleeping. Maybe you're a person who used to sleep 6 to 8 hours, and now you find yourself sleeping 10 to 14 hours a day.
Wow.
Because
Either way
the
can
sleep,
go,
the
yeah.
purpose of the sleep is escaping reality. I mean, the people who want to sleep a lot, when they wake up, they don't feel any pleasure about life, and so it's like back to sleep I go.
And
right?
that
It's
would
an
be the
escape.
part of where people like just get in bed, pull the covers over their head,
Yeah,
and just stay
want to
there.
lay in a bed,
Right.
And just sleep, because when we're asleep, we're not aware, we're not
Of what's
awake, we're not
happening.
dealing with life.
Okay.
Under eating, having a lack of an appetite, or overeating, wanting to overeat, emotional eating. So then there, with the under or overeating comes the weight gain or the weight loss.
Okay.
Feelings and thoughts about suicide. I mean, that is definitely one of the more intense feelings of depression, and extreme feeling where if it gets intense, a person can begin to have thoughts about ending their life.
Okay.
Just feeling like this is too much and they want to, exit. So if any of those things, and there's other things as well, but those are the primary,
Right.
the primary areas. Tearfulness, and just, again, that internal feeling of cellularness. It can be anxiety and irritability. A lot
Right.
of people don't think that depression is irritable, but the unhappiness that comes from depression makes people irritable. So
okay.
people are not always thinking that irritability. People think that, the person is just angry or they have an attitude. No, irritability can be...
It's coming from somewhere,
It's coming
yeah.
from this place of dissatisfaction and just feeling disgruntled with life. And that will make you irritable and agitated. So those are the primary
Okay.
things. And for some people, it affects their ability. Now they're missing days from work.
Okay.
They can't get out the bed. They don't want to go where people have lost jobs. They've lost their relationships. And it can affect your health. So again, depression can affect every area of your life. And it's very important, if you're listening to this and you hear yourself in anything that I'm saying, is to seek help, because there are
Right.
lots and lots of places. So I know before I talked about some resources you talked about for people of color, but there's, of course, I have a mental health practice, but I'm
Right.
not accepting clients, but I do have a grief Zoom that I run once a month. So for those who are feeling depressed because of grief, I invite you to Grieving with Hope. You can find that on my business page, though. Our current page is down. It was
Okay.
hacked or something happened.
All right.
But I post things about Grieving with Hope on my business page, which is Tailor Made Behavioral Health Solutions. So on Facebook, I'm at Tailor Made BHS. But in terms of spaces, you have therapy for Black girls.
Okay.
You have Black, Brown, Delaware therapists.
Oh
In
my
all of
goodness.
these spaces, if you just
Wow.
Google the names of them, the websites will come up.
So these are on your page on
Those
Facebook?
are not on my
They're
pages.
not on your page.
I'm just putting
Okay.
it out there now so people can Google the titles of these websites.
Okay.
There's Melanin and Mental Health. There is Clinicians of Color. Those are just a few spaces, and most of them are www.
They are hard to
therapyforblackgirls.com,
find,
but there
I'm telling you,
are
yeah.
some, and Google is, everybody's best friend. Just look up, platforms to find Black
Mm-hmm.
therapists. There are, I'm sure, at least a good 20 to 30 at this point. There's Black Men Heal that's coming out of Philadelphia.
Right.
For those who are looking for a counselor and specifically want to find somebody that looks like you, we're out here. And post-pandemic, like I said, people have made it easier to find us
Yeah.
by putting us
Thank
in
you
one
so
space.
much. I'm so glad I got to finally meet you, and
It's
I
nice to meet
appreciate
you
you
as
coming
well.
by.
Thank you for the
Um,
invitation.
And we'll have to do this again, maybe in the fall, and I'll think of something else where you can come back and talk to us some more. But today was very informative. I learned a lot, and I appreciate you coming through.
Thank you.
You're
Thank
so
you. And I
welcome.
hope that somebody finds this helpful and that something that was said today leads
I'm
somebody
sure.
to do something different.
I'm sure. Thank you so
All
much.
right. Thank you. Bye, everybody. Thanks for watching.
Bye. Have a good afternoon, everyone.